Hello and welcome to the Somerset Archaeological and Natural History Society, which is usually known as SANHS. My name is Lizzie Induni and I'm the chair for SANHS. This evening, John Page will be talking about the Banwell Bone Caves. John is a long-standing member of SANHS, having joined the Society in the 1970s as part of the Historic Buildings Committee. Later, he joined the Library Committee and the Local History Committee, which he has chaired for the last 20 years. John's a very busy person and he represents SANHS on the Axbridge Town Trust, and for about 20 years he chaired the Axbridge Museum. He was a founding member of the Banwell Heritage Group and acts as treasurer for his local village hall committee. As well as all of this, he gives talks to organisations in Somerset, North Somerset, Bristol and South Gloucester, and writes local history articles for his local village newsletter and has published some books and articles. A very busy person indeed. As usual, John will take questions at the end of the talk. To ask questions, you just need to activate the chat button at the bottom of the page and type in a question. It's free to register for the talks, but a donation of £5 towards the ongoing costs of SANHS would be greatly appreciated. The donations button is on the SANHS website donations page. When donating, please try and label your donations Banwell. And to make things easier, a link to the donations page will also be posted on the chat button at the end of the lecture. So over to John.
Back there, and we just get my window up on there, and hopefully there we go on there. And so right, well, this is my talk, as you see, is about Banwell Bone Caves, and I sometimes call this Lore, Nor and Banwell Caves, and we'll come to the reasons for that a little bit later on. But it's, as you've just been told, I have been associated with there for quite a few years now. One of the things that I find particularly interesting as well is that if you go into the museum, the Somerset Museum in Taunton Castle, then in the main hall there, the Foundation Stones Gallery, as they call it, there is actually a display there of some of the bones from Banwell Caves. And they actually list the 10 top things to see in the museum. And the first one on there, possibly because it is the first one you encounter, is actually a bone from a bear found in the Banwell Caves. And it actually, a quote here from William Beard, who will come to later on, says, "My collection of fossil bones from 6 different caverns was bought by Captain Sanford and the Reverend W. Jones of Taunton, my sincere friends, and removed to the institution at Taunton on the 6th of July, 1864. Now, the institution there is in fact SANHS in its early days, and Captain Sanford and the Reverend Jones were actually members of SANHS. So they were purchasing all of the best bones which William Beard kept for the benefit of the society, and some of those are still on display today. Now, some of you may not know where Banwell is, so just a quick look at that one. Over on the right-hand side here, we have Weston-super-Mare, Cheddar coming down the bottom over here, and Banwell somewhere in between there, between the two of them there. It's, if you look, the town itself here is actually set back a little from the hill. And this hill on here, those one time, it was known as the Hewings. And it was actually where they used to stand on the hill here and watch horse racing going round the hill, because it was completely bare hill. All of those trees have been planted by the bishop, as we shall see in a little while. Our story, though, starts with Dr. Francis Randolph. He was the vicar of Banwell, And as you can see from there, he was actually in his middle 50s when he actually came to Banwell. But he had, at this time, national schools and British schools were starting to be set up around the country. And he thought it was time that Banwell had a school. So he actually had a look around. It's all very well setting up the school in the first place, but it's finding the finance to actually keep this going, which is the major problem. And whether it was something he'd heard or whether William Beard told him is a little bit in dispute. But one way or another, he heard that in the middle of the 18th century, some miners had discovered a cave when they were looking around for more minerals to mine. And it was stated at the time to be as large as the inside of the church. So he thought, well, if we could find this, Weston-super-Mare at that time was beginning to grow quite extensively from holidaymakers. And he thought, well, we'd induce the people coming out from there to come and have a look at the caves and charge them a little bit of money for doing that. And this is the days, of course, before the show caves had been opened up in Cheddar, well before that, in fact. So it was probably the only caves around that were actually being up for viewing. So he actually paid two people 10 shillings each for a week's work each to see if they could find this cave. They had a look around. Unfortunately, they didn't find the cave. But being miners, they thought, well, perhaps if we do find it, it's worth going on a little bit further. And if we do find it, we could actually then maybe test it out and see if there are any minerals. So they carried on looking, and eventually they did find it. And the cave that they found is, in fact, quite a big cave. Here we are, the Banwell Stalactite Cave. And as you can see, it is quite large. You can see why they said in the middle of the 18th century that it was as large as the church in there. But it did have one major problem, and that problem was getting down to it. Because as you can see, we've got John Chapman there, who was a miner and very much involved with the heritage group. He actually is climbing down a ladder to get into the cave, and you can see on the other picture that it's quite a sweep down to get down to where the stalactites are down the bottom there. So it was what they thought they would do is that they would burrow through the hill a little further down and make a new entrance into the cave. So when they did that, then what they found was that there was another cave here, and that this cave was absolutely full of bones. So, as we can see here, we've got the very steep ascent down into the stalactite caves with all the stalactites there, and the bishop's chair down there, which we'll mention later on. But over here, all these bones down here, and there is actually a passageway between the two, but it's completely blocked. And I'm not sure, I think it still is completely blocked in there, and no one dares to do anything, otherwise there may be a major fall. But you can also see in here that there are the passageways which were former passageways that actually where the bones were washed in many, many years ago. We'll come back to that again a little bit later. But anyway, around this time, they got a new bishop in Wells. As you can see, he arrived there in 1824, and that's the year that the cave was opened. He was someone who liked his gardening, Bishop George Henry Law, and if you go to the bishop's palace nowadays, then most of what you see in the garden there is in fact what he actually set up, including the structure at the back there, which was one of those things that was very favoured in gardens at that time. But he got interested in the caves on there, and the reason he got interested in the caves was, well, it's a little bit premature for this, Charles Darwin we often think of as being the theory of evolution, but in fact Alfred Russel Wallace actually came up with the idea at exactly the same time, wrote a letter to Darwin, and they actually both gave a lecture on the same day to the Linnean Society in 1858. But that's a little bit later. However, here we have Erasmus Darwin, who was the grandfather of Charles Darwin, and he actually knew that there was evolution. What Darwin and Wallace actually came up with was actually the reason why there was evolution. But as you can see from his little poem here, I don't know whether you can read that on there, but he does say that from forms minute, unseen, and then they get bigger and larger limbs assume, and eventually you get up to things like the whale and the lion and so on and so forth. So he did realize that over time you actually are evolving, but he didn't understand the reason why that evolved. But excuse me. At this time, there were a number of ideas going around about how the world formed. Neptunism said that it was all covered in water and then that receded into caverns. Volcanism said no, it wasn't, it was volcanoes. And then the idea of uniformitarianism came along, and this uniformitarianism was mainly practiced by a man called Charles Lyell, and he was saying that the landscape was formed by gradual erosion, and that meant that the world was a lot older than anyone had previously thought. This was the reason why the bishop got particularly interested in Banwell Caves. And here we have a book which is by Blair, or it originally was by Blair, which I have my own copy here. And this one actually was being re-edited and republished in the 19th century. And actually, this is in a few years after, this is 1844, so 20 years after we're talking about here. But the thing is that it does start at 4004 BC for the creation of the world. This was a date that a monk had come up with many years previously, and he had gone through the Bible doing A begat B at age so-and-so, and B begat C at age so-and-so, worked it all the way through the Bible, and came out with God created the world in 4004 BC. And this, mind you, is actually being published here, and the name at the foot of the preface on there is Henry Ellis, who is the curator of the British Museum. So as you can see, it was an idea that was very much prevalent at the time, and it was something that the bishop very much believed in, and it's what the Bible said. So what he thought, what happened, the bones came into the cave. Obviously, it proved the Bible was right, because obviously it was Noah's flood that caused it. They had obviously washed all the bones in there. So he decided that he wanted to actually take over the caves, and which we'll come back to that in just a second. But he actually, one of the people who was very much involved with this right from the beginning was a man called William Beard. And here's picture of William Beard. He did like his picture being done, actually. There was a book published a few years later, we'll mention in a moment, and he has his picture in there, which he had to pay quite a lot of money for, and the bishop actually helped subsidize it a bit, but he still had to pay quite a lot of money for it. But he actually was developing the bone cave there, and as you can see from the picture there, lots of stacks of bones being put up there. The actual standalone stacks are no longer there, but some of the wall stacks are still there in the caves today, actually, from what he did. The place is just absolutely full of bones on there. Anyway, one of the great things was that he started to get really interested in the bones and look into them into detail, and he became quite an authority on the subject. In fact, the bishop always called him the professor. And one of the great things is that he kept a journal. And that journal has actually been most useful to us for a number of differing reasons, some of which we'll just mention now. Here is the first entry in 1824, and I don't know whether you can see, but up at the top of the page there, it does say that the property of Mr. Blackburn of Banwell Court. And this was being leased from the bishop. I'm not quite sure here. I've never been able to find this out. But whether in fact it was actually Wells Cathedral that owned it, or whether it was the new bishop somehow acquired it, I don't know. But it definitely in the end ended up in his family. But it was rented out at this particular time. And as you can see from there, people like SANHS members listening to webinars were asked to give donations. And if you look at the donations down there, shilling and 2 shillings doesn't sound to us terribly much. But in fact, of course, in those days, if you remember, I said that the workmen were charged or were given 10 shillings for a week's work. So a shilling or 2 shillings for donations there is quite a significant sum of money. And obviously this would do quite nicely to help the school along. But then in 26, and this is a little bit confusing here because it does say 20th of May 1826, but in the text it says June 26. Anyway, gentlemen and ladies, I have to inform you that I received a letter bearing date 22nd of June 1826 from the Lord Bishop of Bath and Wells, wherein he requested that all the money that I have and may receive of visitors who see the caves are to be expended in exploring and improving the same, i.e. you're not to give any more money to the school. They actually, there are 1 or 2 occasions later on where a small amount of money was given to the school, but only very small sums. It also is quite useful because it does actually show some of the distinguished people that actually attended to the caves there. And we can see here that we have the mark sort of Lansdowne and Dowager Lady Ellenborough down the bottom there. What I always like about this as well is that there's a number of little places like this. Can you see at the top, Miss Phipps, P-Y-L? There's 1 or 2 like this, and they're all about young ladies, and I'm pretty sure that stands for Pretty Young Lady. He was obviously quite keen on the young ladies coming along there. But I mean, the distinguished visitors there, the Duke of Bedford came, the Marquis of Lansdowne there, the John Keble, John Skinner, Richard Colthord, Richard Warner, all sorts of very famous people of the day came along to see the caves. And amongst them, actually, who came a number of times, is the Very Reverend Dr. William Buckland, Dean of Westminster and Professor of Geology at Oxford University. And Lizzie has kindly sent me a copy here of a recent talks that have been done, or an exhibition that have been done by SANHS, in which actually it states on there that he made the inaugural address to SANHS members. And of course, he was leading geologist of his day. He came to the caves a number of different times and was very excited looking at the bones that he found there. There were also other problems, though. In some cases, I haven't shown an example of this one, but in some cases, some people left without paying any money, and he noted their names, and he noted that they did not give any money and commented on that one. In this case here, this is about people pinching bones. So here we are, was taken away by a party out of the bone cavern. It was the humus of the wolf and the advent of an ox tribe. I hope not to see that party at the caves again. And another one down the bottom where something else is taken on there. The greater the shame of visitors who are guilty of such offence. So he made it very clear, but he did get a few losses at varying different times on there. Other items from the journal, and there's a little poem, Once the Deluge Rose Above My Head, a little poem that he wrote himself down there. There's actually a little interesting one down here, which in 1854, Henry Vine's photographer from Bristol took several photographic portraits of Mr. Beard. He sometimes refers to himself in the third party, and alongside photos of his residence. I'd like actually to see some of those pictures. I'm not quite sure whether one of the pictures that I've got is of that, but I am trying to see if I can get hold of that. 1854 is very early for pictures. It's the major negative pictures and so on were 1840s. So we are talking a very early picture on there. We'll come back to the one on the right bottom there, because looking at some of the different expenditures which are included in there as well is actually a very, very useful thing. But the other thing that I do love is this one at the top right, which is to say, this is to certify that I sent 2 oak planks to make my coffin. And long before I was dead. And then he says he wants it made of lime and so on and so forth. This is actually 8 years before he died. So obviously he was making sure that he got it sorted out in the way that he wanted it. He also mentions the fact that there were a number of other bone caves in the area that he was interested in. And there were 6 bone caverns in 6 different parishes, all within 6 miles of his home. Banwell, Uphill, Hutton, Burrington, Bleeden and Sandford. And mainly, obviously, in here, he's talking about the bones from Banwell, but he does actually occasionally mention some of the other places as well. He also, because he became so well known for his interest in bones and so on, he actually was made member of philosophical societies, basically scientific societies, as they were called in those days. And Colchester, Portsmouth, Gosport, and the British Association at Bristol there. All of those are mentioned down there. But he does also mention amongst those that in fact he did give them quite a few little bones at the same time. I don't know that that influenced them necessarily. I think he had become such an expert that in fact he was they were happy to include him in there. So he's quite a guy in that way. And shortly afterwards, we can see up the top or right there that in fact John Rutter did actually come to see the caves at Banwell, but he wrote a book, The Delineations of Somerset, and or Northern Somerset actually, but he actually did this as he was influenced by the cave, although he does actually include certain other areas as well. But it's quite an interesting book to find out some history of the area and the villages around at that time. But as you can see from there, the top picture in the middle there is the 2 caverns that I showed earlier on, and the bottom picture we'll come back to a bit later on. But these are pictures that come out of that book. Again, I have a copy of that book as well. So that was quite an interesting one there. And more recently, then Andy Currant from the Natural History Museum has spent a lot of time actually coming to the caves. I said spent a lot of time. I'm not sure. I think he's dead now, actually, but he certainly retired at least. But anyway, he actually defined the bone, the animals that were bones were found in the cave there, and by far the greatest majority of them were bison and reindeer, which gives you some idea that it was actually quite a cold area at the time. It's a slight thaw in the Ice Age, basically. But then various other ones down there, the brown bear, that was actually huge. We used to have a model of it on some of the open days that we had at Banwell Caves. And interestingly, on there, standing on tiptoes and putting my hand as high up as I could just reach its chin. So it was a huge bear. The only comparison nowadays would be a polar bear, perhaps, but this was a brown bear. And as you can see, some Arctic foxes and hares and such like as well. But one of the great things is that Andy, along with Roger Jacoby, actually have now actually officially made this the type fauna for the early Devonsian period, so about 55 to 80,000 years ago. If you talk about bones of that period, you talk about the Banwell type. So as you can see, it is a very important cave there, and Andy has done a lot of work actually establishing that. But as I said earlier, the bishop was very keen on gardening. The owners who actually helped to set up the heritage group, and which he knew very well, they actually were very keen on gardening as well. And so some of this gardening, particularly the pictures at the bottom on the sides, are things that are carrying over time. Some of the others, like the fish pond at the top there, were things that they actually created, but did so in the right sort of style. As you can see in the center there is the border of the edge of the fish pond there. So that's still keeping the garden going. Here I've got something about the plan of the grounds on here. Originally the entrance was over here, although this is new entrance now into the area here, but originally you came in that way, and then we have things like the house here, the bone caves down here, the stalactite caves actually underneath the house, but far enough down so it doesn't matter. And then around in the grounds, we've got lots of different types of things. A druid's temple down here, a summer house up here, the gazebo up here, the osteoicon up here. We'll talk about all of those and one or two others in a while. But and further up off the map, further up on the right-hand side there is actually a tower at the top there. Some of the things that were in the grounds originally, unfortunately, are no longer there. Here we have the original entrance arch, for instance, but during World War II, it was a tank depot. They were doing some practicing with tanks and so on, and apparently this was not wide enough for tanks to go through. So instead of finding another entrance, they knocked the arch down, which seems terrible. It would be lovely to re-establish that again, but that is something that at the time we didn't have sufficient time or money to actually get that done. Also lost is the Trollathon, which again, you see some of these around in various different places. I know there are some in Devon and some of them in Wales and that sort of thing as well, and various other places. Again, that was removed by the tank group. So we've lost that one, but at least we do have a picture of it, so it could be restored at some time, perhaps. The Druid's Temple is still there. Top left picture on there, the archway to the left is actually the entrance to the Bone Cave, but along to the right-hand side of that picture is the Druid's Temple, and below that is a picture of the temple there with a little, many of the places, follies, do have little poems in there. In this case, it says here, where once druids trod in times of yore and stained their altars with a victim's gore. Here now the Christian ransom from above adores a God of mercy and of love. So many of the poems are very similar to that. But that actually was, as far as we knew, that was the only sort of part of the Druids' temple. But then a few years ago, actually, the farmer removed a whole load of stuff and so on, and we suddenly found that the Druid's temple went round the other side. So if you look top right, then it's in a bit of a ruinous state on there because we never got round to doing a lot of work on it, other than just steadying it. But that actually was discovered on there. So it does actually continue the temple right the way round on there. And then unfortunately, when the previous owners actually took it over, a lot of the follies had been left for many, many years just to fall to pieces. And here we have the summer house. And as you can see at the top left on there, there's bricks showing up where there should be pebbles all over it. The roof has gone completely and it's in a very bad way. Many of the pebbles were very, very loose and likely to fall off at any moment. So we were really worried about this and had to do quite a lot of work to get this sorted out. But here's what it looks like today. And I think you'll see that it is actually much nicer. The camel on the top left was actually, a bit of it had to be redone, but the majority of it we found in a load of rubble not far away from the summer house. The lion we didn't find at all, so that one had to be redone right from basics. But we did have some clues to help us to actually work out where what we should be doing here. Barbara Jones in the 1930s produced this book on follies and grottos, and in there are pictures which are taken from Banwell Caves, and amongst those is a drawing of the camel and the lion on there, and but also of the interior of the summer house, and that actually proved something very interesting. On the top right, you can see there that John Haynes, who was one of the owners of the property at the time, he was an internationally renowned carpenter who actually taught at all sorts of places on carpentry, and he actually has done the superstructure on the roof there in very, very good fashion on there. So they should last for a very long time, hopefully. But we also, if you remember, I mentioned the journal that Beard kept. Well, here we are, paid for beer when picking up pebbles at Weston, a shilling. You might not think there are many pebbles at Weston, but actually if you go up to the north end of Weston, where they're redoing the pier up there at the moment, there are pebbles around at that time. And look, they paid for 2 children picking up pebbles, obviously 6pence each, but it cost 3 and 6pence to bring them up to Banwell. And then on another page beside this one, it does say paid a woman and a girl 1 and 6pence for picking pebbles. So they were getting, all sorts of people to pick pebbles up on the beach to actually do this. So one of the great things about this is we do know from these sort of information exactly how they built these things and what they were doing with them. And in particular on this one here, we know that they were using Roman cement. So we can actually, when we redid it, we used Roman cement on there in the same way. But here, I mentioned that picture that we had. And if you notice in the ceiling, this circular bit in the ceiling, because we'd lost the ceiling, we had absolutely no idea that that was there. But the people who actually did the work for us on here, they have created something. Obviously, it can't be exact, but it's very difficult to see from the picture exactly what it was. But I think they've done an excellent job on there of creating that sort of thing. And there's a picture of the ceiling, and there's a picture looking at from the side, so you can actually see where it is on there. And I think they've done an excellent job on there. Very pleased with that one. At the back of the summer house there's those sort of seats in there. We're not quite sure whether they were seats or whether there were statues or something in there. But again, one of these little poems. Reader, descending from this awful brow, survey the wonders in the caves below. Thence, mid these relics of a deluged world, look up from nature unto nature's God. So it's the bishop is whether he wrote these poems or got somebody else to do it, we're not quite sure. But you know, here we are. This is Noah's flood. Again, the deluged world. It's highlighting that again. Here's that picture. What he did actually was to set up a little cottage ornée so that his visitors could go in and have afternoon tea with him and various things like that. We have a little plan of this, but it had a drawing room and a dining room in the cottage, but also an apartment for John Webb. John Webb was one of the original two miners who went looking for the stalactite cave, and he actually obviously had an apartment there where he could sleep there, and he was under the control of William Beard. So the front room on that one, the top room on there, is actually still the entrance hall of the house. So that has been retained. Then some of the things that we have lost many, many years ago, I'll come back to the obelisk a bit later on, but there is a picture of this, but it's nowhere to be found nowadays, and I'll talk about that again. But it is actually up near where the tower is at the moment. And here we have the driveway there. But remember, when this started, it was the bishop who planted all these trees. So many of these, there are trees that are around 200 years old. Unfortunately, not quite so many, because in the First World War, they chopped down a lot of trees for war work. And so some of them are only 100 years old. But it is quite an amazing wood that the bishop had set up there. And then there is another place, the gazebo. This one has been steadied and so on and so forth, but not completely finished, although quite a bit of work was done on it. We're not quite sure about this. He had a summer house at the east end of the village, and when he died, Bishop Law had the summer house re-erected at the caves in memory of the man who initiated their discovery. This one here, when you look at the gazebo, it looks a bit tricky to have moved that from elsewhere. And there is another foundation which possibly could have been the original summer house. So we're not quite sure about exactly which one that is. Unfortunately, with the other one, it is just a foundation, so we don't know anything more about it. And then there is the ostion doxion, or osteo-icon, as it's often called nowadays. And you can see from this picture, the main picture, that it was in a pretty awful state at the time. But we do have pictures of it there, so we can actually start to work out how to recreate that one on there. And a lot of work was done on there. Again, we used the journal to find out that there should be coal ashes for the floor, paving resting on them, brick for the back window, and a lock for the bone cave as well, besides things like garden rakes and candles. Candles, of course, were one of the major items in there because they were needed for the caves as such. But here we are on this one. There's, as you can see on the top left picture on there, there is a little halfway along one side there is a little extra bit sticking out. When we actually redid it, the cost of doing that would add quite a huge cost to it, where we decided that it was easier just to do it as an overlap on both sides, rather than trying to add that extra bit of roofing on there. So it's not quite as it was originally, but again, you can see a lot of woodwork done on the roof there, and it has actually been redone there. The walls on it, again, not easy, because as you can possibly see, there's a curvature on those walls. And again, here mid diluvial relics in this cell, let musing heavenly contemplation dwell, and hence beholding him who reigns above, adore a God of justice, but of love. Another one of there was quite a few of those around. Showing the picture of the brown bear in there because that was the objective of this osteoicon, was to display some of the bones in there. There, John Chapman, actually, with pictures by John Haynes, did write a short history of Banwell Caves. I'm showing that here in particular because there's a couple of items that are in there. The alcove seat, again with its little poem there, and the privy. We were a little bit worried about this privy, actually, because it's a standalone privy, and we did some work on getting it restored and such like, not for use, actually, but because we were a little bit worried about this as to where all the effluent went. So we had to investigate that a little bit carefully, and we discovered that there was a chamber underneath it, and there was access to this chamber from outside. So poor little somebody or other had to go along every now and then with their bucket and spade and get rid of it all. But at least it doesn't go down into the cave. And then there's the lodge, it's mentioned there. Just a little further along from the gate along the road, when I showed that map originally, there were a number of buildings in the corner there, and there was a lodge there along with the stables and various things like that. Those are actually owned by the local farmer there at the moment, who does some lorry work and that sort of thing as well. So fairly heavily used area there. But then the bishop decided that he would build a house for himself where he would retire. And he started there in 1833. It took quite a few years, as you can imagine, to build that place. But by 1840, he actually had started to get a little bit of dementia, and so they put him out to grass. In those days, bishops continued until they died. But they put him out to grass, and his son and various others helped out with the work on there. But again, you see the summer house at the top of the hill there, and you can see the archway leading into the bone caves there, and so on. And so, but quite a building on there. And inside that building, there's some stained glass. Bishop Law actually went to France just after the Revolution. And while he was there, he found that a lot of the churches had been desecrated, and he saw this lorry load of stained glass. So he purchased it and brought it back with him. And the majority of it is actually in the chapel at his palace in Wells. But the bits that he had left over, he's put into the windows in the house here in Banwell. So that is what you're seeing there is actually genuine French stained glass from the medieval period. Now, I mentioned that obelisk earlier, which we've lost completely. And we think that it is, in fact, underneath the tower. The tower stands on a mound. We did wonder at one time whether, in fact, what they'd done is just knock the top off and put a mound around the base of the obelisk. But when we were actually doing some work on the tower, we did actually get some people in to check out, and they did it by digging down a bit and by doing a little bit of geophys and that sort of thing. And there's no trace that we could find of those steps from the obelisk at all. But the tower is supposedly built on the site of there. The second picture along there shows what the tower used to look like. The third picture shows what it was like when we the Haynes and the sergeants actually came there. And as you can possibly see, the top of it is shattered there. The spire is cracked open, and in fact the steps at the top were all broken and disheveled and so on as well. So it was in a very, very sorry state, and we actually had it repaired. And again, you can see it's got its spire on the top there. One of the things, a lovely story on this one is that to get that up there, we obviously had to use the same materials that had been used originally. And it was done with some rather large blocks of stone. And they were so heavy, getting them up the top of the tower there was going to be a major job. And we did wonder how, I mean, we were talking, should we get a helicopter to come over and do something? Getting it up through the woodland, you know, a crane or something like that would have been almost impossible. And we just didn't know how we were going to get these up there till a guy called Damien, who was involved with us at the time, said he'd been doing a lot of carrying recently. He'd have a go. He picked up one of these huge, great stones, walked all the way up the stairs with him. I must admit, I went behind him in case he fell down to start off with, but he walked all the way up, put it down at the top, came down, had a little rest for a moment, took up about 3 or 4 like this, then had a longer rest, and then eventually took all the stones up that we needed and carried them all the way up there. How on earth he managed it, I still don't understand to this day. But as you notice, what we've got is an iron steel railing round the top, whereas in the second picture you can see that in fact it had a stone parapet on it there, and we actually did get a quote for that, but frankly it was so expensive to do that work that we decided we needed to sort out some of the other follies before we actually could afford that, and never got round to actually finishing it off there. Great shame, but it would be nice to actually do that sometime if somebody, the right person, buys it. I'll come back to that. Anyway, here we do have a tablet that's written on there. The tablet unfortunately no longer exists, so we just got a transcription, and I'm told on this, I'm not a great authority on Latin, but I'm told it's absolutely horrible Latin. But the nearest we can get to it is this tall tower, George Henry Law, Bishop of Batham, Bath-and-Wells Bishop, kindly given the year of our Lord 1840. So some of that we can be sure about, but the first line in particular is a little bit tricky on there. I don't know if any of you are any good at Latin, but I don't think it's good Latin anyway. So here we have a picture of the bone cave. The bottom left there is the entrance to the bone cave. As you can see, very similar to the original entrance to the cave grounds altogether, and we're looking at it from above because the land behind it rises quite steeply up there, and we're looking across to where the extension was that we discovered after a time. As far as the stalactite cave is concerned, the original entrance is on the right hand side there. The top one of those is the original entrance, and it had beside it again something which possibly had a statue in it or something of that sort. Unfortunately, that's gone now, but it was that made us think about the summer house at the back of the summer house having those 3 recesses there, whether they also had a statue on there as well. And then just inside, as you can see on that, there's a path in the bottom right-hand corner of that picture. And just inside there is the other picture, which is attached to that one, which is another entrance into there. But neither of those are used nowadays. If you go from the original one there, there's round the hillside there's an entrance which goes down there into the modern entrance there. Again, quite steep, as you can see, quite still. Now, in the late 20th century, there were extensions discovered in there. If you look at the map down the bottom left-hand corner on there, you can see that the Bone Cave is on the left top. The entrance to the stalactite cave at the top right, with the old entrance and the new entrance down there. And from the Bone Cave there, they were pretty sure that there was an extension on there, but they took quite a few years to actually try and find that extension. And eventually, Percy Baker, who's shown top left and bottom right, actually managed to get through and find what is still called the Baker extension, but that actually was the Ruby Chamber. Now, the colour in the pictures there isn't necessarily exactly right on there, but it is Ruby Chamber because the walls were very much leaded. And so on. So Percy, dear old Percy, he was very good for caving, actually, because he was quite small and therefore he could get through gaps that other people were having difficulty getting through. And then, well, let me just show, if you look bottom left on there, you've got the Great Chamber, and down below it, the Green Lake. And in fact, that was discovered by Chris Richards. Here he is sitting in the bishop's seat, as it's called, which actually is a huge, great chunk of rock which had fallen down from the ceiling. But he actually comments on that one, a very comfortable seat indeed, as far as cave seats go. So unfortunately, not sure exactly how much of the chamber is still available, but certainly the Green Lake, there has been a fall down there, so that's difficult to actually, or almost impossible, I think, now to get down there. It's called the Green Lake, actually. He did actually admit that it's not necessarily green water in there, but in the light that they had, it looked as though it was green. So that's what they called it, the Green Chamber down there. Now, as I mentioned, John Haynes and Ron Sargent, who are shown here, they actually purchased the house and got very interested in its history and the follies and so on. And up until that time, there'd been a lot of dilapidation as far as the follies were concerned in particular. But they and Yvonne Sargent actually helped enormously in doing this. Yvonne was very good for open days with doing some excellent cakes and such like. But unfortunately, John's wife, Pat, died rather suddenly. It was a great shame, actually. We had an open day, and at that open day, we'd had a great day, lots of people there, and she'd been helping, doing all sorts of things with everybody. I said goodbye to them, and everything seemed fine. And then I was phoned up the following morning to say that she has suddenly died overnight. It had been known that she had some heart problems. But anyway, John carried on with the work. As I say, he was doing an enormous amount of the carpentry work, but Ron was also doing an enormous amount of work on there. And those two families were actually the reason why the follies are now in the good condition that they are. Other people who were actually involved in there, Lindsay Shaw. One of the things in the main house, there is a separate part of the house, which is actually in the old days, the servants' quarters. And Lindsay and her husband lived in the servants' quarters. But they were very, very helpful with us, Linda and David. And she actually was the secretary of the group for many, many years. Dennis Parsons also took a great active interest from Taunton Museum. So he was a lot to do with putting on the display down there and so on. And Professor Danielle Shreve also came round there and got some of her students working on essays on it and such like as well. So a lot of work was actually done on there. And then, of course, I mentioned Andy Current, John Chapman as well. John Chapman was a caver who actually had done the caving there before the Haynes and Sargents came to live there. And he got involved with them right from the start and became chairman of the heritage group there. I was treasurer. And Andy, as I say, this is a picture I took of them beside the bust of William Beard in the church in Banwell. So there is the house. I do love this house, actually, in that there's that little door in the roof there beside the chimney for access to the roof. I'm not quite sure how useful it was as such, but a very unusual door, I thought, there. But that house is still there, and it is actually up for sale at the moment. But here we are, William Beard. Now, in the 93 year of my age, and written without glasses. He lived in Bone Cottage in Banwell. I didn't mention, actually, just going back a couple of slides here, when I showed here, you notice the whale bones over the doorway on the right-hand side there. He had those in his over the front of his house. But he does say at the bottom, read 31 chapter of Proverbs 26 verse. So I put that up here. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. I must assume that he's talking about his wife. I don't know exactly what that refers to. Anyway, so there we are. That's Banwell Caves for you. And though I say the end is nigh, I hope that's not exactly true, actually. The caves are on the market at the moment. Unfortunately, John Haynes and Ron Sargent had both died a year or two ago, and Yvonne is now no longer living there. She's in sheltered accommodation. And so it is up for sale. It's been up for sale for quite a long time. I did actually try to see whether I could get someone like English Heritage involved in doing it, because it would be fantastic if they could take it over. But they said they weren't going to take on anything new at the moment, which is a great shame. If you know of anybody that's got about £1.2 million to spare and would like to have it as an open place, then I would really love to hear about it. But anyway, there we are. That's the Banwell Bone Caves. So, Lizzie.
Thank you very, very much, John. That really was quite fascinating. I have been to the Bone Caves, but not for very many years. And all I remember is actually going into the caves and seeing the bones stacked up in very tidy little piles, which I'd never
Yeah,
seen anything quite like that before. I don't
no, quite.
remember ever seeing any of the gardens at all, and I don't remember ever being aware that there were any gardens to go and
Well, when
see.
we had open days, we used to have conducted tours around the gardens with explanations of what was going on and that sort of thing as well. So someone would be down in the caves and someone else would take people around the follies. But they are a very essential part of the bishop's historic aspects of the Banwell Bone Caves.
Well, it's lovely because it seems to have been set out as some sort of pleasure gardens, really, for your
Yeah.
entertainment and I don't know, it's a small amount of education thrown in as well.
Well, unfortunately, when the bishop died, his son continued there for some while and then sold it on. And although some quite well-known people in some respects were lived there, the follies as such were just left to rot in the main. And what you see now, the restoration of those, was work that Sargent and the Haynes and the Heritage Group actually managed to put together.
It is a
And
phenomenal amount of work doing all that. Did you get a lot of grants and finance for it?
We did get some grants and finance for it, yes, but we also had open days, so that we would have probably 3 or 4 Saturday, Sunday weekends during the year where we had open days, and
Yes,
obviously we got hundreds of people came along for those, and we
yes.
would raise some money for that. In fact, there's still a bit of money left around, so I'm hoping whoever comes in to the caves will be wanting to do some work on the follies, and I can help them out a little bit with some funds that we've still got.
Absolutely. So it's not open to the public at the moment then.
It's not open at all at the moment. And of course, this time of year, it wouldn't be anyway, because there are bats in the caves. Some of them, greater horseshoe bats, which are very rare, for instance. And so you're not allowed in the caves during from October to the end of March
Mm.
at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it seems a pity because it's just a fabulous bit of history from many points of view, isn't it?
Oh, I think so. Yes,
Absolutely
I've been
stunning.
absolutely fascinated by it, and I'm still
Mm,
learning new things about it as I go through.
absolutely. Why do you think there were so many bones in that cave?
Oh,
And also why are there so many bone caves on the Mendips? What on earth was going on?
well, we're talking about the Ice Age, and
Yes.
so most of the places were frozen for quite a long time, but then there was a period when there was a certain amount of a thaw, and during that period, then bones would be washed down and go down into a hole in the caves. You remember I showed you
Okay.
there were a couple of holes into the cave from above, which
Yeah.
had been open. So they got washed down at that during that period when there was a bit of a thaw.
Okay. Well, it makes you
But
wonder what happened to all
other
the other bones that weren't washed down the holes, isn't it?
well, I mean, I guess that at different periods there might have been small thaws where things have been washed down and that sort of thing as well. So I guess most of them would be that. But in this case, it was particularly that period, which actually makes them so exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And I understand that I think I'm right in saying that some of the bones found there are actually some of the rarest bones to be found anywhere in Britain. Is that
Oh,
correct?
they are. I mean, the huge bear there, for instance, is
Yes.
extremely rare and
Yes.
a fascinating bone. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Ah, fantastic. Now we've got some questions coming in, and anybody who's still watching, don't forget that you can put questions and for John to answer. Um, Starting at the bottom here, is the main cave not protected in any way, even though on private property? Could it be designated an SSSI?
It is the site is designated as an SSSI, and in fact, the caves are actually locked, so
Yeah,
you can't
yeah,
just go into them unless you have access.
yeah, yeah.
Some cavers are allowed in at times, but well, they not at the moment, of course, because there's nobody there. But yes, they
Yeah,
are protected, and the same way
yes,
as the tower is also protected and such like at the moment,
yes,
because the amount of damage that was done to that before. Yeah.
absolutely. And presumably anybody who was buying the property would have quite a responsibility on their hands then.
Yes, indeed. Yes, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. But I mean,
need
the
to,
as far as the previous owners were concerned, they actually thoroughly enjoyed
yeah,
what they were doing on there.
probably a good
Hopefully,
job,
we'll
isn't
get
it then?
somebody who's also going to be interested.
Yeah. Good question about Roman cement. Somebody would like to know what Roman cement is. As far as I can remember, it's a naturally occurring cement, isn't it, with a very high clay content?
Yes, and I mean, actually, at the beginning of the 19th century, cement was very rare. It was lime cements that were used before there, and Roman cement is one that actually came up that was actually getting closer to the cement we use today, but it's not
Yes,
quite the same.
yes,
So it is
absolutely.
an interim cement. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a question here about the name that you've given. It says you call the bear found in the cave a brown bear Ursus arctos, but they say it was much bigger than any around today. So should that be cave bear Ursus spelius?
Well, I didn't name the bears on there. They were named by the Natural History Museum, and
Right.
I think I'm not going to
They
argue with
probably,
them. I'm
yeah, don't argue with
not.
them. And the sort of bones that were being washed down, do they give much sort of insight to the evolution of certain species and or the disappearance of a certain species? I
Oh,
mean, presumably somebody's had a really good close look at these bones.
oh, they've been thoroughly studied, and Andy Current and Jacoby and Danielle and people like that, who all know what they're talking about, have had
Yeah,
a good look at these bones.
yeah.
They in the museum, they have a look at them as well. Yeah, they've been thoroughly studied actually, and and of course the main ones were the bison and the reindeer. And again, I mean, we don't have reindeer much in this country anymore, but that tells you something about the climate at the time, doesn't it?
It does indeed. Yes, yeah, quite cold. Right,
Mm.
fantastic. Well, that was really good, John. And the nice thing is we're going to be able to put this onto the SANHS YouTube channel. So for anybody who might have missed it, you can go and have another look. And yes, well done all those people who've come back from not missing it last time around when we had some technical problems.
Yeah.
That was very unfortunate as well.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. Okay, then. Thank you very much, John. That was really enjoyable.
Thank you.
So we have some SANS events coming up soon. Um, our next webinar will be on the 19th of March, and Laura Beckwith, who runs the Somerset Portable Antiquities Scheme, she will be talking about some of the more recent finds. So that's Thursday, the 19th of March, which isn't very, very far away. And on the 28th of March will be the SANS annual Archaeology Day. And that's a whole day of archaeology, which will be taking place up at Stanton Drew Stone Circle. That's just south of Bristol, I think. And there'll be more information on the SANS website about that. But that is a whole day of archaeology, which sounds rather good fun. There will be speakers in the morning and a tour of the stone circles in the afternoon. Now, our associated societies are going to be very busy this month. In fact, on the 6th of March, you can go to Wells Natural History Society and have a talk on the Cosmos in Stone, Sacred Geometry of a Master Mason by Tom Bree. And that's in at Wells at 7 o'clock in the evening, and also on the 6th of March, Yeovil Archaeological and Local History Society are having a talk about Beyond the Fringes of the Stonehenge World Heritage Site by Andrew Manning, and that will take place in Holy Trinity Church. The next evening, 7th of March, no, it's the afternoon, 7th of March at 2:30, Froome Society for Local Study are having a talk about Remarkable Trees of Stourhead by Emily Ertgren, and that will be in the assembly rooms at Froome. On the 10th of March in the evening, Weston-super-Mare Archaeological and Natural History Society is having a talk about Romans, Saints, Vikings and Normans by David Elsie, and that'll be at the Friends Meeting House. On the 11th, and I told you they were all very busy this month, at 7 o'clock, North Sedgemoor Local History Group will be having a talk about the history of a local house by Brian Wright, and that will be at the King Alfred School on Burnham Road in Leybridge. On Friday, the 13th of March, Banwell Society for Archaeology and Local History is going to have a talk on Trenches to Trams, the Life of a Bristol Tommy by Clive Burriton. And that's at Banwell Youth Community Centre. On the 16th of March, St Petrock's History Group is having a talk on Exmoor's Victorian poor, from bread tokens to workhouses. And that's the St Petrock's Church at Timberscombe. On Monday the 16th at 7 o'clock, Milbourne Port History and Heritage Group are having a talk on Tithe Barns by Joe Rogers in the Church House. On the 18th at 7 p.m, Somerset Vernacular Buildings Research Group are having a talk in the parish rooms in Somerton about two houses in Somerton by John Rickard. So there we are. That takes us up to our next webinar, and then we can give you details after that of further talks this month. If you want to know a little bit more, please go and have a look at the SANHS website. The details for all those talks are on the events page. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed, and I'm sure you have, learning a little bit more about Banwell. And thank you to Nathanael, Tony and Allan, all behind the scenes there, keeping the whole thing running. So see you at the next webinar, I hope. Thank you and good night.